Welcome to Seismic Sound Off, exploring the depth and usefulness of geophysics for the scientific community and the public. I'm your host, Andrew Geary. In this unique episode, Diana, Sineva, and Stephen Brown highlight the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 from the United States and why it's important to incentivize and fund energy efficiency policies. They offer a distinctive perspective on pursuing energy independence and how businesses and consumers can utilize energy inefficiency for their benefit. Also, Diana provides a path for geophysicists to thrive in any future energy environment. This episode explores cutting-edge policy and research to offer a novel perspective on topics that will impact the world for generations. Diana Sineva is an energy transition advocate with formal training in the renewable energy field, supporting sustainable and energy-efficient models for transformation. Stephen founded Capital Assets Energy LLC, a successful clean energy development consulting firm that specializes in financing retrofits of commercial, nonprofit, and multifamily properties with energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements. To read their complete biographies, visit seg.org/podcast or check out the episode show notes. And now, my conversation with Diana and Stephen. I'm with Diana and Stephen today. We are talking about energy efficiency incentives and policies. I kind of start with a holistic view of this. Why is it important to incentivize and fund energy efficiency policies?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. First of all, I'm very happy to be back to this session. To the question why it is important to incentivize, there are a couple of things there, I think. First of all, we talked about this last time. 40% of all energy converted to electricity, so all energy ready to use, is being wasted today. And it's being wasted through different behaviors, through faulty installations, through equipment inefficiency, and through many, many other things. So incentivizing energy efficiency brings a very important gain to the society, to the companies, to industries. First of all, we can do more with less. And second, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we can reduce the CO2 emissions without very hefty investments. However, to get there and to understand what is important and how it can be done, government incentives and policies needs to be in place.
In addition to what Diana said, I think, obviously cutting carbon pollution is a big reason to focus in on energy efficiency. From what I've read, we could cut somewhere near 500 million metric tons of carbon pollution a year by 2050 if we were to implement a number of different energy efficiency strategies. But some of the other benefits of really focusing on energy efficiency is that, one, you have the ability to create jobs, right? And so, making inefficient building stock that exists right now and throughout the country, and then transforming it into energy efficient buildings, offices, commercial space, homes, apartments, you name it, nonprofits, it will require people to do that. And there are a lot of trades that are training folks to be able to be a part of this new energy efficient economy. And so, I've read maybe some 2 million jobs can be created just by making, just by helping to usher in energy efficiency, which, by far, overshadows whatever job opportunities might be in any of the fossil fuel related industries, right? And so I think there's a future in job creation and through that economic development for many communities. But the other part is that because you're using less power to get the same result, right? The light still comes on, except you're being more efficient about how much power is needed to turn that light on. In doing so, you're also allowing for people to lower their bills. And so as we look at inflation and some of these inflationary pressures that are impacting the globe, energy inflation is a big part of that. And it's not something that's talked about much. And so considering that you have an opportunity to make someone's home more efficient or someone's apartment more efficient, not only have you created jobs and cut, pollution, carbon pollution, but you've also allowed that homeowner, that family, to keep more money in their pockets. And so, it's actually a cash flow positive, opportunity for a lot of families. And they can in turn use that money, whether it's for transportation or healthcare or groceries or savings. And so you just create, a whole new paradigm from an economic development standpoint as it relates to jobs and family cash flow that I think is important to state as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about energy inflation being a part of that. And speaking of inflation, in the United States, legislation was recently passed that they had called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. How does this act encourage businesses to address their energy efficiency, this 40% number that's being lost?
So think about this. Stephen touched on a payback period, right? Think about this. If you do a study today on replacement of energy source, for example, if you want to put photovoltaic panels on top of your roof, and you are somewhere in the north of the United States, today that simple installation will pay off in 15 years, which is almost impossible to commit, right? And there we are talking about, there is some tax incentives in New England, for example. This is a place where I've done this project. There is a tax incentive. There is a net metering. So there are some, this project, by the way, was done before the Inflation Reduction Act. So today's situation may change. But before that, 15 years of payback period, this is something impossible for any homeowner to comprehend. Further, if you implement energy efficiency procedure best practices that will require also some investment, but not very hefty, you can cut that payback period to 7 years, which is more than half. And that already includes the investment that you need to do to insulation and some equipment change. So you can see how energy efficiency for simple homeowners can reduce this payback period to 7 years. However, even 7 years, it's a very long horizon for a regular homeowner, because I was reading the statistics. There is about 4 to 5 years of this relocation period where people will live at the same house and relocate on average. Of course, some places use longer, but on average is about 5 years in the United States. So talking about investing a significant amount of money that will pay back even in 7 years is kind of very long horizon. So having this incentives and hoping that we can bring this back to 3 to 4 years will actually make a huge impact and reduce this anxiety of making big investment in this financial environment we are. It will actually make it possible for people to consider this kind of incentives. And this was the example that I brought to you is just about the regular homeowners, so residential sector. Think about industry. There are completely different timings there because the investment would be much bigger. But then also the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act will be significant as well. And I'll let Stephen elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's right. And, so in addition to what Diana mentioned, in terms of the payback, you look at the reasons why is because of, the rebates and tax credits that are built into the policy. There are a number of consumer home energy rebate programs. I think that total in like $9 billion worth of funding that's available for those types of rebates. There's a number of tax credits that consumers will be eligible for. There are grant programs, about $1 billion in grant programming for affordable housing to make affordable housing more energy efficient. It's really a once in a lifetime piece of legislation, piece of public policy that we should look back 5-10 years later down the road and and use that as kind of the critical juncture for when America really began to make strides in facilitating this emerging clean energy economy. And I think that what you're going to find is that, in addition to the things we talked about, all the other benefits from reducing energy inflation, creating cash flow for families and businesses, reducing or abating carbon emissions. I think the other byproduct that all of this will serve to offer that doesn't get talked about nearly enough is energy independence. Too often we've allowed oil and gas to define what energy independence means. Energy independence doesn't mean that you're drilling more locally or domestically. Energy independence means you don't need as much energy anymore, right? And so the very reason why energy efficiency is important and why energy efficiency should be what connotates energy independence is because you're literally not requiring to drill anywhere anymore as much as you once were, because you don't need as much to get the same power, right? And so I think that's something that's so important in terms of our geopolitical frameworks and challenges, is that, these rebate programs, these tax credits that are built into this legislation actually directs us along a path of true energy independence.
The United States certainly has a very large economy and footprint when it comes to the energy industry, but it's a global sector. The SEG membership is global as well. What lessons can other countries take from this legislation that was passed in the United States that you would like to see them at least consider?
So if you study the map of renewable energy production globally, you can still see that it is very spotty. If you plot this on a map, it's very spotty. One can say this is because of resources availability. There are different resources. Some of them are more or less efficient in terms of production or electricity generation. But primarily, this is because some countries, for a couple of decades now, actually, are incentivizing alternative energy productions, right? And those countries are not necessarily the countries that need that energy the most. Those countries are those who have long-term perspective, who have resources and understanding what needs to be done. I think it's great to see how United States pick up this way of incentivizing alternative energy production, alternative sources, renewable sources, and energy efficiency practices, because it also shows how it can show how it can be done, how it is possible. But the good thing is this program also capitalizes on what is already done. Because relatively speaking, we are in a new territory. Even if we talk about decade or decade and a half, where this transition started, and some countries like European countries are a little bit, but are implementing these policies for about since 2011, maybe 12, right? It is a learning curve. And when you are the head starter, you do a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of misallocated incentives, or policies are not working as you intended. So today, I think there's a good understanding of how things should be done and what things are working and what are not. And the Inflation Reduction Act addressed most of the things that should be considered. So I guess those countries that are looking to pick up this kind of policies and incentives, they can get this document, analyze it, understand it, and adapt it to their reality. I think this is a great starting point.
Yeah, so I totally agree with everything Diana said. I think that first thing is that, you look at Egypt and a COP, the last COP that was in Egypt, you could see where the United States could go into those global climate discussions with a sense of, more purpose, a little bit more higher ground, and that, we kind of put our actions behind our words and made the commitment in the IRA that demonstrates to the world, our seriousness in this and our ability now to influence others to do the same. And so to kind of take a look at our frameworks and to build on that, I know that there's still a lot more to be done around how we invest in the emerging economies in a way that provides them the ability to have resources for renewables, energy efficiency, and all those other things to adapt to a warming climate that was caused by America and other industrialized nations. So that still needs to be done separately. But as it relates to the breakthroughs and the Inflation Reduction Act and being able to now on a global stage, discuss that with our chest out and shoulders back with a little bit more authority, and talking to others about, what they can do now to fill voids there. But the second piece of that is that, again, in the Inflation Reduction Act, you've created more incentive for domestic manufacturing of energy efficient appliances, right? And so now we can begin to turn up the volume on America's manufacturing prowess as relates to things like heat pumps, for instance, right? And so as we speed up production of these types of measures that can be used domestically and it can be exported internationally as well, you'll find that the accessibility and the adoption rate from consumers on putting heat pumps in their homes, for instance, will increase as well, right? And so I think it's important for us to also understand how the incentives in the IRA as they relate to domestic manufacturing, and that will allow for mass adoption of energy efficient appliances that are made in America is a benefit, kind of a win-win scenario. Again, we've created jobs. We have a competitive advantage now in manufacturing of energy efficient appliances. And then two, we get to install those appliances into homes and businesses and churches and school buildings, so that they can reduce their carbon emissions as well. So again, there's a win-win scenario there, but it all just kind of comes back together in a way that I think, as we look back 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll see how this was, really a remarkable moment for the United States.
Diana, you talked about how kind of new a lot of these policies are. I mean, we're talking 10, 15 years, these things have been going on. So really, a geoscientist might be just kind of catching up, or really we're kind of in the first wave of what that means, being in this more energy efficiency environment. What kind of recommendations would you have for a geoscientist interested in exploring this more? What's a good first step for them to start working on this realm of energy efficiency?
Andrew, this is a great point, because geoscientists, by definition, we are prone to optimize everything we are doing, especially those of us who work in exploration, which is the biggest cost center for oil and gas companies. So we are always scrutinized by how much we spend, how do we spend it, whether it's spent good or not, right? So this is in our blood. It's running in our veins to optimize and make everything more efficient. What should happen today is understanding how we implement the same principles, not only to our job or what we are doing, but also into our life, right? We need this little translation from something that we are doing at home into our lives and into our way of thinking. Stephen touched today the opportunities in a job market. And what I also see is this Inflation Reduction Act made possible for many startups to actually implement their ideas today. You can see, if you just watch the Greentown Labs, how many startups they have around energy efficiency. They are still working on specific problem, like it can be HVAC, it can be insulation, it can be new materials. But there's a boom of companies that are thinking about energy efficiency. And for geoscientists, I think it's a great opportunity and in a sort, if I can say this, way out from conventional oil and gas. We always think that geophysicists, we always think that we are very specialized. We are very good at what we do, but that thing that we know how to do may not be important anymore. But if you get away from the words and into understanding that geophysicists are great with databases, geophysicists are great seeing the situation, analyzing it, and making good decisions with big uncertainties. We understand how to work databases. We understand how the data need to be prepared and how the data need to be analyzed for absolutely anything in the world. It's applicable across the industries. So if we just get out of our very specific terminology and think in more general terms, out of those 2 million jobs, many can be taken by geophysicists and geoscientists in general, simply because we understand how to work with this data, how to optimize this data, and how to implement all that knowledge that we have in modeling, in predictions, in neural network, and etc. in this new world of new energy production. I mean, it's still energy, right?
Yeah, geophysicists excel at working with the unknown. So this is just a new way to apply that skill set. And this is a huge topic overall. This is the second episode on energy efficiency, but we've, been talking about carbon sequestration in several episodes now. This is a huge topic that we unfortunately could talk for hours, but we don't have that much time. Stephen, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Diana. What would you like to leave the listeners with on energy efficiency, incentives, funding that you would just like them to kind of consider and take away from this conversation? We'll start with you, Stephen.
Yeah, I think that we really need to, as a country and those of us who are working to try to make carbon emission reductions throughout the country and the globe, I just think that we need to elevate how the role that energy efficiency plays in that, kind of paradigm change. Because, oftentimes we spend, and rightfully so, I mean, there's a lot to be said about renewables and EVs and all of that stuff as it relates to their role in abating emissions. But energy efficiency also is very important. And then I will also add that, when we discuss energy efficiency, I'm not necessarily saying that we, go from a gas-powered heater or a boiler to a slightly less gas-powered boiler. I'm saying that we look to electrify, our heating needs in our homes, right? And so I think this is really and truly a way for us to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, because, as Anna mentioned earlier, I think the world had kind of a shock to its system as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so when countries decided to stop, importing from Russia, I think that did something phenomenal. Not only, the bad news is that meant that they had to figure something out. But the good news is that I think they figured out that they need to accelerate the clean energy and energy efficiency faster. And so like heat pumps, for instance, like I mentioned before, I think the adoption of heat pumps in different parts of Europe has actually sped up because of what's happened with Russia and Ukraine. And as a result of that, yes, there's still European countries that are looking to import American gas to serve its needs. But I think they see that as a short-term fix for, what the true solution is to not have to depend on anybody's gas, right? To heat their homes and their water or what have you. And so I just think that we are, we need to embrace the role that energy efficiency plays in this framework of carbon emissions, and that we look for opportunities to expand access to communities that otherwise would lack the resources to be able to become early adopters here. And I think that that's something that definitely needs to be a part of the conversation. Not only how we transition to a more energy efficient world, but how we do so in a just and equitable way.
Yeah, these are fantastic words, Stephen. I couldn't agree more. The only thing I would just add is very often when you talk to managers, to executives, they separate the issue of CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions with energy efficiency. They view this as two different problems, whereas in fact, it's one single thing. Energy efficiency, or better say, increasing energy efficiency, inevitably impact the CO2 emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, right? So if there is one thing I could add, I would just say, let's see this energy transition as a one whole and use energy efficiency as a tool to achieve what we want to achieve, instead of separating it and creating different departments and treating it as something, okay, let's do this as well. This is a component, a very important component of this energy transition, and the only thing that will help us realize this transition sustainably.
I think that is a great place to leave it there, Diana. Thank you for joining us for a second time. Stephen, thanks for coming on to talk about this important topic. And there'll probably be more on this topic in the future. So thanks for outlining it so clearly and so well today.
Thank you for having us, Andrew. This is always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you as well. Appreciate it.
You reached the end of Seismic Sound Off. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to be the first to know about the next episode, please follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Two of my favorites are Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have episode ideas, feedback for the show, or want to sponsor a future episode, visit seg.org/podcast and find the box titled Contact Seismic Sound Off. Zach Bridges created original music for this show. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by me, Andrew Geary at Treasurement. The SEG podcast team is Jennifer Cobb, Kathy Gamble, and Allie McGinnis. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.